Hi, welcome to another episode of the Mapscaping podcast. My name is Daniel, and this is a podcast for the geospatial community. Today, I'm joined by Aravind, the founder of TerraWatch, an independent research and advisory firm focused entirely on Earth observation. He also writes the TerraWatch newsletter, runs the EO Summit, and teaches courses on the business side of the industry. Basically, if it has anything at all to do with strategy and economics of Earth observation, Aravind has probably thought about it more deeply than just about anyone. In this conversation, we talk about what Earth observation actually is, whether it's even an industry at all, or just a horizontal technology quietly disappearing into agriculture, insurance, defense, and energy. We dig into why 60 plus countries are now building their own satellite constellations, and what events like Planet restricting imagery access mean for the rest of us. We also get into some technology trends, AI foundational models, hyperspectral data going free, edge computing on satellites, and what's actually moving the needle. And we talk about why, despite all of this, Earth observation still isn't mainstream, and what Aravind calls the defense paradox that's holding it back. This is a conversation about where the industry has been, where it's going, and honestly, why it's still such an exciting place to be working right now. Enjoy the show. Hi, Aravind. Welcome to the podcast. I'm really pleased you could be here with me today. Looking forward to this discussion. You're the CEO, founder of something called TerraWatch, and you're really interested in Earth observation. So I'm going to hand it over to you now. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about yourself and what TerraWatch is.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks for having me here. Obviously, long-time listener of the podcast. Glad to be here and, discuss Earth observation. So, I run a company called TerraWatch, essentially independent research and advisory firm. We do, 3 or 4 things these days. One, which is the main part of what we do, which is consulting. So advisory work, which goes across the ecosystem from government agencies, space agencies, for which there's a lot of policy and economic impact assessment work. So really kind of looking at the ROI of investing into Earth observation and, data policy, working together with the private sector. So that's work with the public sector. Advise a lot of companies in the Earth observation sector itself. So a lot of strategy, go to market, investment thesis, business model. So a lot of standard strategy consulting work. Advise a lot of enterprises, large enterprises that are trying to figure out how they can use satellite data or why they should use satellite data. So we go in and provide an independent assessment of this is what it can provide. This is the kind of ROI it can give you as a company if you start using. And this is hype. This is reality. So kind of differentiating a lot of that for them to help them kind of make a decision on how to go about using this technology, especially for some industries where there's a lot of value in using it and they're trying to figure out how to go about it. So we kind of provide an independent perspective. Obviously, not being a provider or not being a developer of any solution, they kind of provide that independent perspective. So that's kind of the consulting side. Obviously, the newsletter, that's kind of how a lot of people know TerraWatch, which is the newsletter that kind of provides analysis and insights on the market, provides updates on the news. I kind of analyze and dissect what's going on in the industry, talk about what's going on. And that started more as a kind of a hobby passion project because I couldn't find anything that kind of curated and provided analysis on Earth observation specifically, which is very much satellites and kind of in that domain. So a small part of geospatial if you want. So that's kind of the niche that newsletter focuses on. And then the third thing that we do is organize events. We have an event called EO Summit, which is a conference that is mainly kind of born out of the frustration of not having any users in any conferences that I've been to. So was not really a plan when I started TerraWatch, but then I really attended almost every conference out there in Earth observation and some in the geospatial world. But at least I can say in Earth observation, couldn't really find a lot of users. So decided to put together a conference, EO Summit. So the conference focuses mainly on users and applications. So we don't talk about technologies. We talk about different applications in the conference by design. So we don't have a panel on anything technological. We only have discussions on applications. Of course, technologies are part of that application, but then technology is not the driving force behind the conference. So that's the third one. And then more recently, started doing courses, online courses, to kind of help people either onboard themselves into Earth observation because it is still, I hope, an exciting area to work on. We can talk about that in a bit. But I think it's still an exciting area to work on. So much money going in. a lot of people wanting to understand how the industry works, not the technicalities, which you can go and learn online, but more what the market is, how the business dynamics work. So that's kind of what the course focuses on. So started doing that more recently. So yeah, those are the four things. Yeah, I started about 4 years ago now. Yeah, the goal was to kind of create a practice very much focused on Earth observation. And the vision was to do activities that can help make Earth observation mainstream, hopefully. And I have a definition for mainstream, which I can get to later on. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. So the goal of every introduction is just to convince the audience that you're someone worth listening to for the next half an hour, 45 minutes of their lives. And you've done it. Congratulations. Maybe we should have started with this, but you talked about like a definition of mainstream. Let's start with a definition of Earth observation. What is Earth observation for you?
Earth observation is really, you can kind of synonymous to remote sensing if you want. So that's the closest kind of definition, which is, again, something that I have huge, kind of, I guess, opinions on. What is Earth observation? What is remote sensing? What is geospatial? You can kind of define those three separately. Of the three, I think Earth observation and remote sensing are the closest. So, I mean, I would define, anything that is kind of sensing the Earth remotely. So that includes satellites, which is, let's say, the biggest kind of part of the market, if you look at it, especially the amount of money going in. But of course, you include drones, you include helicopters and aerial, all of that into Earth observation. And I think just by the definition of how remote sensing works as a technology, you cannot make satellite data work without having ground data measurements and validation from the ground. So you kind of also include that into the mix, even though it's not really remote sensing. So that's kind of how I look at the definition. But in terms of satellites, of course, it's remote sensing satellites, which includes weather satellites, imaging satellites, not communication, obviously, not navigation. But then that's kind of how I define Earth observation. That's kind of how a lot of the analysis work that we do, kind of, that's where it lies.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense.
So do you agree with that? What is your definition of Earth observation? Do you have a definition?
Yeah, no, I don't have a definition, but I always think of imaging. Always, like passive and active sensors.
So you don't include the atmospheric sensing, like, we look at the atmosphere for weather, so you don't consider that Earth observation at all, or is that a different industry for you? Because for me, it's part of this industry.
Yeah, to be honest, I haven't thought nearly as deeply about it as you. I just draw on my university days where Earth observation was called remote sensing, and it was looking at satellite images, and so that's still the way I think of it. And that's kind of the only really touch point I have with the industry is when I talk to people that are building satellites, working with satellite data. So that's the way I think of it.
Yeah, fair enough. I think my kind of definition is not going into geospatial, because geospatial is a wider domain. It's a discipline all by itself, and remote sensing is just a horizontal technology. It's not a discipline, which is also why, if you have to talk about the definition of mainstream, if you want to go there, I can kind of talk about that. But Earth observation is probably not going to ever be a discipline by itself. It's a horizontal technology, and it'll stay that way.
Interesting. I always talk about the geospatial industry, and just so you don't think about Earth observation as an industry?
Not particularly. I think it is kind of a subsector within space. Again, if you want to go into kind of technical definitions, terminology, etc., but I wouldn't really call Earth observation as an industry. I mean, obviously, when I write, I talk about the Earth observation sector, etc., but then, in the wider context of things, it's not really an industry per se. Geospatial is definitely an industry, and Earth observation is a small part of it, of course. But Earth observation by itself, I wouldn't really call that an industry, because again, I don't think of it as an industry. And also that's why I think when it goes mainstream, it doesn't mean that it's just going to become a huge industry. When Earth observation becomes mainstream, at least my thesis and my definition is it will become invisible. So it will become invisible in ag, it will become invisible in insurance, it will become invisible in energy, et cetera, et cetera. So it will just kind of become part of it, as opposed to just transforming it into an industry by itself. So that's just how I kind of look at it in terms of at least the mainstreaming part of things.
This is fantastic. This is exactly why I wanted to have you on the podcast. So I guess your argument is that it is not mainstream yet. It's still very much a thing, like a new thing that's entering into agriculture, just as an example.
Well, is it a new thing? Not necessarily. Landsat has been available for 50 years. The first satellite was launched in the 60s, or the first kind of the NRO aerial programs of surveillance and monitoring started in the 60s, Corona program. So, we have had images Agriculture has been using images for decades. So is it new? No, but is it mainstream? I wouldn't really call it mainstream yet, because you also need to be operational and deployed that people forget about that exists. And that's when it becomes mainstream.
Give us an example of that. Like, can you point at another technology and say that's mainstream?
Yeah, no, I mean, even in Earth observation, I think the most mainstream part of Earth observation is weather. You look at your phone, you look at the forecast, 80 to 90% of that was supplied by data. I've surveyed people, they can't name one weather satellite, which is great because that's how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be invisible infrastructure. And weather is the most mainstream application of Earth observation. It's been like that for a few decades now. And it's also quite an example of a technology that, I mean, again, you can go back to, people, Arthur C. Clarke, who's defined, technology when it works, it's like magic. And it's somewhat related to that, it just runs in the background. Earth observation kind of is not there yet because we are still kind of figuring out a lot of things. More and more data is becoming available. Is there a point where we will reach a saturation level of like, we have enough data? Maybe we'll get there in the future, but at least for now, we are kind of still trying to figure out gaps, fill in gaps in different industries. Can you really monitor all the farms in the world? Maybe not, because farms in the West, you can monitor with a 10-meter resolution, which is now open and freely available via Copernicus. But then if you go to farms in Asia, Latin America, but Africa, Asia, and Latin America, the farm sizes are very small. So if you really need to monitor all the farms over there, you need higher resolution. But higher resolution is very expensive. So it takes a long time before it can get mainstream. So it's just one example of why it's not mainstream. But then maybe there are people in the West who might argue, you know what, we've kind of deployed satellite imagery or any form of remote sensing for decades. So it's mainstream for now. I mean, I would argue it's not the case in other parts of the world. So it's not really mainstream. But yeah, anyway, I'll stop there. I can keep yapping on.
I was just, you brought up Arthur C. Clarke, and I was just thinking the future is here. It's just unevenly distributed. So I would argue that it's mainstream in some places and definitely not others. Interesting you brought up farming there. I was just talking to some people from the Fields of the World project.
Yeah, 100%.
That is fantastic.
Amazing project, yeah.
Yeah, and they were mentioning exactly some of those problems that you were talking about. So before we actually did some preparation, listeners, before we came on this podcast, we didn't just jump on here and start yapping away to each other. And we had a few talking points. Can you remember what the first one was?
Was it sovereignty? Because that's kind of the
Well done.
The thing that matters.
Can we start there?
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of where we are in the world. It's basically, we're talking about countries and in some cases regions kind of launching their own assets into space to have a bit of independence with respect to satellite data, especially considering how satellite data is foundational to their national security needs. So mainly the defense and intelligence industry, DNI, as we're going to call it. So yeah, DNI is kind of like being the dominant industry in terms of revenues for satellites, in terms of how the industry is growing, in terms of what kind of technology is being developed. It's all been from DNI. So it's not really surprising that in 2026, where we are in the world, after the first kind of, I call it like there are two kind of milestones in industry. One was in 2022 in the war, and then 2025 when a new administration came online in the US. So yeah, I think there were two kind of pivots that led people, governments to, I guess, make decisions that would enable their countries to have independence. And, it's kind of a shift from the 10 years before. I've been in industry for 10 years, at least the first 6-7 years have been more collaboration, let's work together, let's share more data, both on a governmental level, from a defense and intelligence perspective, but then also from a civilian and commercial perspective. But then I think 2022 and 2025 meant that we kind of went in this direction of, we track about 61 countries, I think, that are either planning or have already started deploying their own satellites, again, across a number of sensors, whether it's SAR or optical or thermal, hyperspectral, etc. But yeah, I think that's kind of where we are, and that's dominating the big countries, but also the smaller countries. And that's kind of what Earth observation is today. A lot of money going into launching these satellites. I have strong opinions on, are they going to exist in 5 years? How many of them will actually have the funds to keep deploying it? Because, let's be honest, it's not cheap. Yes, it has gone down, but, it still is $100 million euro investment to have something online that is actually good enough. Because one thing is to just put a flag on your satellite and say we also have a satellite, but another thing is actually have your Ministry of Agriculture, your Ministry of Defense, your Ministry of Environment use that data that you're launching those satellites for. If you just have it for namesake, that's a whole different discussion. But then a lot of governments actually want to make their users within their countries use the data from those satellites. So it also means that the satellites need to be good enough. They need to be future proof, right? Like you can't go and launch, I mean, you can because they're doing it. But if you go and launch a satellite constellation of 3 meter, let's assume that's your constellation, that was done 10 years ago, right? Like Planet has hundreds of 3 meter satellites. So if you're a government, you're launching these satellites, is that going to be future proof as a technology? Again, we can argue. Go on.
Yeah, interesting you brought up Planet here because they recently announced they're restricting access to satellite data. And I think, do you see this as another one of those turning points that you're talking about? And to get back to the idea of being good enough, well, maybe your 3 meter satellite, 3 meter resolution satellite would be better than nothing at all. And if somebody else has, and if you start treating this as infrastructure and then someone turns it off, that's a big deal.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a factor. I think obviously that's a bit more recent. I mean, I'm going to wait and see what the consequences of that are. As you can imagine, it's only making the sovereign discussions that started 2-3 years a bit more. I think they're getting a lot more validation from, I guess, developments like that. And I think, I mean, I also have kind of a strong opinion on this particular event itself. I mean, it's, obviously it's not great, whether you're a journalist, humanitarian, someone working in the humanitarian sector, or really just anybody. I mean, I've spoken to commercial companies who have had their access cut off. They are or they were paying customers. So it's not ideal whether you're looking at it from an impact standpoint or you're looking from a purely commercial standpoint. I mean, they've also lost customers, right? The commercial customers who used to use Planet data, now they are being told we can't have the images now. And they're wondering, so how am I going to see what's happening around my asset, right? So even the commercial case is going away. So it's not really a point. But then I think for me, the underappreciated point is Planet did something progressive for the industry. Before that, you did not have an API for satellite imagery. Planet launched an API for satellite imagery. Planet gave data to journalists and humanitarian folks and the OSN folks for free, right? So that was something progressive. But now the result of what happened is they tried to take steps forward, but they were punished for that, for going a bit further. The same thing is true also have a couple of other American companies. They also don't supply data over the US. But guess what? They were never easy to get data from anyway. So they didn't need to put out a press release saying, we won't have data over this region anymore because you're used to getting data from us. You can't get it anymore. But then the other companies, they were never easy to give away data anyway. So they didn't have to put out a press release because, they were never easy to get data from. They didn't give data away for free all the time to journalists. So, it's almost like, yes, Planet is being portrayed as a villain. Again, I'm speaking as an independent. I don't have any shares or anything with Planet, but then I'm just saying that objectively, they try to do a little thing better, but then now they're being punished for doing the same, obviously for political reasons now. But yeah, again, going back to the point what you raised, it is making, I think, the infrastructure point a bit more clear for a lot of governments. It's going to be very easy to make the case, You have this event. If you had trouble getting the approval, budgetary approvals for your own constellation, I think now it should have become easier.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm not here to jump up and down on Planet either and say they're the bad guys. I know nothing about it. I'm just looking at this going, wow, here's another event of someone turning off what a lot of people will assume was critical infrastructure. And then from one day to the next, it's gone. And so, like you just said, if I was thinking about this, I'd be, how can I, quote unquote, future-proof myself, my business, my country, my intelligence? What am I going to do? Well, we need more options. Do you see this as being a real sort of boon for the industry? I guess what it's going to mean is a flux of satellites, sensors, and imagery, data, and hopefully all the technology around it.
Yeah, well, I think that's already starting to happen. I think we have a tracker of how many programs and satellites have been around. They already mentioned, 60 plus countries. 90 plus have made like soft commitments, and 60 are the ones who've actually kind of seriously started to look at it, which I think is a huge number because when I started in the industry, I didn't really have a number of tracker of that. But then if I were to make an educated guess, I think at that time it would have been probably a couple of dozen. So it's more than doubled. And I only expect that to grow even further. And the fact that you have a lot of off the shelf sensors and components that allow you to, I mean, another case study, right? Like Canary Islands. I don't know how many of the audience know where the Canary Islands are. I mean, obviously, they're a part of Spain, small group of islands. They have their plans to launch their own constellations for their group of islands. So technology has become so commoditized that you can, and it's not really a big investment. I think they made 30 or 40 million, don't quote me on that, but then it's not this 100 and 200 or half a billion figure that you're speaking about. It's small number, enough to have, I don't know, 6 to 10 satellites, maybe a dozen of them, enough to cover your area and give you imagery, I don't know, every day, every couple of days, kind of again, to make sure your territories are monitored, you have data. Is it going to be the best data source in the world? Is it going to be like Landsat? Is it going to be like Sentinel? Absolutely not. But it's going to be, you take Essential off the shelf. Maybe you do a bit of customization, a bit of R&D, and you launch those sensors, whether it's a thermal sensor, which allows you to see, wildfires or other activity on the ground, or optical sensors. You can go and kind of buy it out the top of the shelf. And, if you've kind of tracked what's going on with ISI, which is an interesting company by itself, because when the company was founded in 2016 or 17, their goal was to kind of monitor ice melting over the Arctic, because, with SAR, you can see that very well. But right now, ISI is, I believe, valued at 2 or 3 billion euros, or maybe more. And they have over 300 million euros in revenues, 250, I think, recently. And I would say like 3/4 of that or more than that, it's going to be from defense. They are selling satellites like, I don't know, anything that you go and buy off the shelf. It's, countries are like, do you want to have our satellites? They go to ISI. ISI sells them a three or four or five satellites. And because ISI has a good manufacturing plant, they can get it launched in 2 years or a year. And, the country suddenly has SAR, which you can argue is one of the very good sensors out there because you can, see through clouds, and it does a lot of interesting applications defense-wise. So you're a country, you are in the best possible time to do that investment today because you can have that satellite launched in 1 year, 2 year, or you can even just go and lease capacity of something that already exists. Like you're super desperate and you want something, and the satellite already exists in orbit. You can go and say, I'm going to lease 30% of capacity of your satellite that you already have because I need it right now. I can't wait. So they're probably at 5 years ago, you couldn't do that. So, somehow I guess everything's kind of working out that you're doing it at this moment in time.
What do you see in terms of trends? So we talked a little bit about like how that the satellites almost, you make it sound like they're becoming a commodity that you just go and get one off the shelf and throw it up into space. I guess that's one trend. What else are you seeing in terms of technology trends out there, and hardware and software?
Yeah, well, I guess we talked about a bit of sensors. There are obviously the spectrum of sensors that allow you to kind of monitor the entire electromagnetic spectrum. So, thermal, hyperspectral, multispectral, and optical, of course, and SAR, as we talked about, and LiDARs, and, bunch of remote sensing instruments out there. So, that's going to keep going on. There's a lot of science missions. Again, shouldn't forget that. It's the foundation behind everything a lot of the companies are doing. So what the space agencies are investing in, whether it's NASA, again, it's a bit of a risk, but it's a tangent of what's happening in NASA and the Earth science budget over there. But ESA continues to invest science missions and new instruments. So that is going to keep going. ESA has, satellites that are really, really amazing, like the biomass satellite that launched recently, P-band SAR, NISAR that was launched by NASA, L-band SAR. All of them are amazing instruments that don't exist in the commercial world, right? So it's all about companies. I think we need to acknowledge that. It's also the public programs. So yeah, I think one more thing on the hardware side is maybe I'd probably point out to edge computing, onboard processing. So, just processing the image on board the satellite and then downlink an alert if you want, or downlink a location. So if you're, looking for maritime monitoring and you just want to spot a ship, and, if your image resolution and quality is good enough that you can actually have the model on board the satellite that just spots the ship and then sends the location down, for instance, or just sends the ping down.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think that's, again, starting to become a bit more operational. It's not completely mainstream. I think the value of that is still being debated because as this is happening, what's happening in parallel as well is inter-satellite links and laser communication, which means that you can really kind of take an image, send it to another satellite, which is over a ground station, and then, beam it down. So you can probably get that in a few minutes. So if you can get the imagery down in a few minutes, do you need to bother with processing on board the satellite? Those kind of trade-offs are happening, but then technologically it's becoming possible is probably the key point here. Yeah, so that's on the one thing on the hardware side. On the software side, when obviously, you're in 2026, so you can't not talk about AI. So I guess that's also a thing in Earth observation. I mean, I would argue, I think it's probably one of the best use cases of AI, especially if you look at it from a weather standpoint, what AI weather models have been able to do and demonstrate. So much so that ECMWF, the European Weather Agency, now has an AI weather model and a physics-based model running in parallel to kind of leverage let's say, the scenarios from both sides. So I think weather is a very, very good use case of AI, operational, that is being used every day here, at least if you're in Europe and getting a weather forecast, you're getting also from AI. So it's operational. And from a satellite imagery point of view, I think there have been, again, quite exciting developments in the last year or so. Obviously, Google with their Earth AI kind of suite of products and their foundation model, but then also a bunch of other foundation models from, I think, the AI2 model, obviously the one with NASA and IBM, one that ESA is working on, and also, companies developing their own custom model, not a general purpose foundation model, things that are very focused on agriculture, things that are very focused on flooding. So yeah, I think custom models that are fine-tuned for specific use cases are also coming in. Again, I think the real value of that is still kind of debated because I think at least my hope is that it's going to make the improving the awareness of what satellite data can do. These models are going to make it even better. If you can go and ask a ChatGPT-like interface, what was the wildfire risk over an area, and you get an answer in a few minutes, I think that's great. What's not great is it's not going to be accurate 100% of time. You may need to fine-tune the model depending on which part of the world you are in. But the fact that this is possible means that before, I mean, I'm sure, you would agree that for someone to know what can I get from satellite, they need to spend a bunch of money, wait a couple of weeks before someone gives a dashboard with a pilot or a report saying, oh, you know what, this is the change that has happened. And that trying period was a few weeks plus, a few $1,000s of investment. And if we can get that down to zero and a few minutes, for me, that's a step change in kind of making people understand the value of satellite, which has been a big barrier in the industry. That has been one of the biggest barriers is people had no clue what to do with it. It's like, what do you mean I have to look at a green band or a red band for NDVI? What do you mean NDVI? Like, I just want to know if my crop is stressed or not, right? And what is the reason, which part of my field. But to be able to get these answers, you had to wait a couple of weeks, which is kind of crazy. So the fact that that's kind of getting easier. But anyway, yeah, I think the foundation models are definitely a big trend. And I'm sure you've already done or will continue to do many, many more things on foundation models, especially with respect to satellite data.
It's pretty hard to get away from talking about AI and foundational models these days. Everyone seems to be doing it. And when I say that, I don't mean it's a bad thing. I think it's actually a really, really exciting time. So what use cases do you see picking up? So we're talking a little bit about the trends, some of the things that you see happening. What use cases are picking up? And which ones, I guess, have there been, I guess what I'm asking, are there any sort of winners and losers when we think about use cases?
Yeah, well, I mean, if I have to be cynical, I'll say the only use case or the only industry here that's kind of picking up is defense and intelligence, because that's just been the story of the industry. So you can't not avoid it. It's 80% of revenues. Well, Planet is a public company. 80% of their revenues is from government, 20% is from non-government. So, and of which I think 60 odd percent is government. So if you use Planet as a good kind of benchmark to understand the industry, that's where we are. And I think that's also where my answers are going to go, because it's just where the real facts are. But I think having said that, there are a couple of areas where I believe the value of, especially Earth observation, is almost non-substitutable in a way that alternatives don't exist. If you were kind of use the principle of substitutes and alternatives in the market, yeah, I think one is utilities. So if you have any kind of infrastructure, whether it's a pipeline, power line, railway line, anything that goes in tens of thousands of kilometers or miles, you cannot avoid or not avoid using satellite data, because drones can only get you so far. Helicopter is expensive. If you really want all your parts of your assets monitored, especially in a new world where you have kind of increasing frequency of kind of extreme weather events, then you got to be prepared, whether it's a wildfire or flood or whatever the event. So you need to kind of monitor everything scalably. And the easiest way to do that is to use satellite data. I mean, high resolution imagery, kind of the trend of prices was kind of going down. I hope it continues, but then logically, economics says more satellites, more high resolution satellites means lower imagery. So, but I don't know how long, if that's going to actually be the case, because government is paying a premium for high resolution data these days. So, is the trend going to continue? I'm not sure. But then that industry has picked up and they're using satellite imagery operationally. Whether it's a network all around Spain, whether it's a power line all around the US, the PG&E, which is Pacific Gas and Electric Utility Company in California. So they've been kind of using satellite data to monitor tens of thousands of kilometers of assets. What's happening in combination with helicopters, in combination with drones, because there are some cases where you need a 10 centimeter resolution or a 7 centimeter resolution, which satellites cannot give you. So, but satellites can give you scale. So you kind of use that in a very smart way. So that's one use case. Other use case that's picking up is insurance, parametric insurance. And parametric insurance, again, it's basically insurance that can be automated instead of having someone come to your house and see if it's flooded, or come to your farm to see if it's flooded, to see that your crop had died a few months before harvest. You had to come into the field to do it. But with kind of satellites, you can use a lot of proxies, like, the soil moisture has been going down. So, we can give you the payout automatically, because you can see the crop is going to die because your soil moisture or flooded, right? Like, you don't have to come and see that your farm is flooded. You can see that by our satellites or properties. And for me, that's a very important use case, because I'm very personally interested in the use of satellite data in non-Western markets. And I think parametric insurance is one of them. And there are a lot of use cases of parametric insurance of how farmers in India, farmers in Africa, farmers in Southeast Asia had gotten the payout before any middleman can take away the money, before anyone can lie and kind of say, what, it didn't happen. But you have an objective source of truth here. It did happen. And so, yeah, you will get your payout. So for a lot of people whose livelihoods is, whether the income they get from farming or whatever. So for me, parametric insurance is a good kind of market for that. And satellite data will drive and is already driving a lot of those initiatives. So those are two kind of areas where I see a big kind of uptake for satellite data. So that's two things that I can remember off the top of my head, but probably there's more that I've missed.
So this was years ago now, but I remember when I first started this podcast, people were, the classic example people brought up of these new uses for satellite data was counting cars in a parking lot. Oh, if we could just count the cars in every parking lot, then we could figure out the value of the stock.
Yeah, well,
that's dead, right?
Yeah, of course, if you were to make like a satellite imagery, use this list of duds and, winners and duds, that's definitely it's not really a bad use case, because it's the same kind of principle that you use in commodity trading. So that's probably another use case that I should have mentioned, commodity trading with hedge funds. So you want to see what's going on in the port, what was shipped and what didn't ship, what's the pace of kind of shipping and trading around the world. It's the same principle that you use in ports to kind of count containers. It's the same kind of, let's say, computer vision model that you kind of use on cars versus the port. So I think that model itself has value, but not for that specific use case. Counting parking lot, it's still a real use case, right? Like, to understand trends, but it's going to be the $1 billion market that's probably a hype. But the use case itself, or let's say the technology behind that use case, it's foundational, especially in commodity trading, to identify containers, like I said, to identify like trends over a period of time. Again, this was very, very useful in it's weird I'm saying early days of the war, but yeah, it's been 2 months. So, the first few weeks, this was a very, very important use case for commodity traders to kind of identify how many barrels of oil's being shipped from where? How is that is that going to end up wherever they need to on time? So there's value, but yeah, I think I agree in terms of overall that use case. Yeah, I saw that in conferences 7, 8 years ago, and I wasn't very convinced then, but yeah, definitely not convinced now.
But someone else had the same experience as I did. So we've got all this combination of stuff happening right now. We've had a few sort of scares out in the market where people have thought, "Oh, we need to be more self-reliant when it comes to satellite data, especially in terms of our defense and intelligence industries." So we're building more satellites. I think you mentioned the number 60 again and again and again of these people that were actively, or countries actively out there ready to spend money and acquire their own satellites. We've got trends in AI, these foundational models being adopted. Compute is getting easier and easier. Storage is decreasing in cost. And we have cloud native geospatial formats, which are making access a lot easier for people. Why isn't it mainstream? So why isn't it bleeding over into more industries? When you talked about it, was defense for Planet, for example, was 80%.
Government was 80%, of which, government is 80, of which defense is about 60, yeah.
Yeah. So why isn't it not mainstream? Why isn't it bleeding out into other, what's stopping people? Is it the processing power? Is it doesn't fit with other use cases? What is it? Why isn't it sort of broken through?
I thought about this question a lot over the last 2, 3 years. And well, I wrote something about it, which, got some comments for me that were not very nice, maybe because I was just laying out the facts. So I think, yes, there are a couple of factors that you can point out, like price of satellite data. I mean, processing power is not really a problem now. And you can argue there's not enough data available, etc. But then I kind of wanted to go back to the first principles of why is this a problem? And the thing that I ended up with is what I call the defense paradox. The industry that has contributed the most to the growth of Earth observation is defense, whether from the 60s when the industry started to where we are today. But I think it's also a paradox because I believe that's also the industry is the biggest hindrance to the growth of the commercial market. Again, it's not really a controversial thing because it is true that defense has a lot of say in what's happening in Earth observation, whether you can supply data or not, right? Planet case study from 2 weeks ago to what is the price of your data? The price of your data is X because the government pays X and you kind of have to price it the same way. If you go into a commercial market, you can't kind of price it 10X low. So all of that kind of goes back, or how you deliver the data. You have to deliver a data via an open API for a lot of commercial companies to start using. And that's what Planet started to do. But then a lot of the industry is still focused on giving data out via a sales channel that is not scalable at all. Commercial cannot scale like that. I used to be in the software world. You need to have things open and you need to have things available via API. So if you think about it from a process point of view, you think about it from a pricing point of view, but also technologically, maybe what the utility industry wants is high resolution data that can be taken over a wide swath. So they want a sensor that can look at a wide swath, meaning, one image needs to be a very big image for them to cover a lot of assets. But that's the requirement from the utility sector. Are constellations being built with that in mind right now? No, I think the constellations today are being built with what the DoD or the defense industries in the world are interested in. So whether it's what sensor you deploy, what is the type of instrument you deploy, or the configuration of the satellite, which orbit you sit in, all of these are being dictated by the defense industry, again, because it is the biggest funder. So I don't blame the companies, but that's just the state of the industry. Because it's kind of dictated a lot by that, what is being pushed into the commercial world is almost like try to make it work, try to make the pieces fit together, whether it's the sensor, whether it's the pricing model, whether it's what kind of algorithms we're using to process the data. It's all kind of trying to take from one and trying to apply it to the other in kind of a procurement trend which doesn't match at all. Like government wants as much as possible because they want to be able to monitor everything and they're ready to pay for everything that you provide to them. Commercial, on the other hand, have this ROI principle. If they don't get value out of it, they're not going to pay for it. So you can't say, I am mapping the world every day, take my data and give me the money that I require. They're going to say, I will pay for whatever data is useful for me and is adding value for me. So there's a mismatch business model wise. So I think fundamentally, I think that kind of paradox is kind of what has been the big problem. It's not going away, right? Today, that's also still remains the biggest part of defense industry. But yeah, I think, yeah, fundamentally, it is really a government contractor, the Earth observation industry, mostly. I mean, I kind of have like a 15-year thesis for maybe it's possible for unlocking both at the same time. It's a 10 to 15-year thesis and used to be lower, but given the state of the world right now, it would be kind of unfair to have the companies go and target a commercial market when you really have like budget waiting from governments to be unlocked. So nobody is going to say, you know what, no, I'm going to go and unlock the commercial market. I think that's not a rational decision. So yeah, maybe 10, 15 years, it can become mainstream, but AI is going to be a big part of it. I hope open data continues. I think that's also a thing that we haven't talked about. That's kind of been a big factor in the industry. Some people say it's an inhibitor because people won't pay for the data because they're used to free. But I have seen enough cases where people will pay for the data, like I mentioned the utility case. They need to see the asset. Free data will not allow you to see the asset with 10-meter resolution. So they know when to pay, but it needs to be provided, priced properly. It needs to be with a model that works for them. So yeah, anyway, I think we can get there. At least I'm hopeful. Probably not in the short term, but in the long term, yeah. Because the industries are not going to go away. Insurance is existential right now because of the events that are happening. Same with utilities, same with agriculture, same with finance. So the demand from the industries, for me, is not going to go away. We can pretend that the commercial market is small, it's difficult, but for me, the demand is only going to increase. We just need to find a model that works for them to unlock it. And then it can become mainstream, as in invisible, as I said.
Yeah. But fascinating. I've never thought about it like that before. Obviously, I knew that the governments were huge consumers of satellite data, but I'd never thought about them like they are the client, right? So everything is built for them. I never thought about the rest of us basically having to sort of shoehorn whatever we can get into our own workflows as opposed to having something custom built for us. But what do you think about governments perhaps making this stuff available after a certain time period?
I think that's the direction we're going to go in. Hopefully, we will go there because there's going to be so much capacity that, like I mentioned before, governments have to find a way to make this a market. They cannot keep funding 200, 300 million because that money is not always going to be there. And I'm part of policy discussions that are evaluating these things on a national level, but also of course, on a regional level like Copernicus, but on a national level as well. That is going to become more and more a reality. They will start giving data away via archives. Maybe 10% of enough capacity will be given away in order to enable their own businesses. They have launched their own constellation. They've spent 100 or 200 million or 50 million to launch that. They want companies within their own countries to be able to use that and then buy from the companies that are selling them in the longer term. So that will start happening more, especially if they want to keep that as a long-term initiative, because it's very easy to launch the first constellation because you're trying to make a case. Planet made it easier, and the geopolitics of today makes it easier. But if you want to continue, because satellites are going to fall down in 5 years, they are in low Earth orbit, so they will fall down. So you need to replenish them, hopefully with a better sensor, because sensors keep getting better. You can't launch another 3 meter 5 years later. You know what I mean? So they need to maybe put in a bit more money as well. So I think that opening up of data, probably not in today's world. We need to have a bit of normality before that happens, because I think, you can argue that from a privacy point of view, we haven't talked about that. Do we want a lot of that data to be open out in the world? Yes, there's a lot of impact. It needs to be out in the world, but do we need to have high resolution imagery of the world out for everybody? Like, from a privacy point of view, and in the new geopolitical world that we have, do we want to have like a 1 meter data available 1 week later? What can that unlock, or what is the risk of that? We don't know, of all of that data becoming available. We already saw 10-meter data. And if you've seen the Washington Post analysis recently, they used Sentinel data and data published by Iranian media to verify, in the absence of Planet data, what really happened to US assets. And it turns out the investigation found that US assets were more damaged than what was reported. And they used Sentinel data for that. So the good thing is Sentinel data will allow you to do that, and it exists. The bad things, we don't know yet. And when we start putting out more and more high resolution data out in the world, maybe that's not going to be great. And maybe we will have some edge cases that will happen in the world. So I think that conversation probably needs to happen more, but it's probably not the time now because today is not the time when people are opening up your data archives. Probably living in the wrong timeline for that. The geopolitics are not going to allow you to open up anything these days. We need a bit more normality for that to happen for me.
Yeah, but that discussion around privacy is really important, and there's no easy answers to that at all. At least not that I've come across. A few weeks ago, I was talking to the people from Common Space.
Yeah, I've spoken to Bill about it, and
Wow,
yeah, they're
tough.
doing an incredible thing, which is why I guess what they're doing is incredible. But what I'd probably like to see, just because of the nature of this technology, is maybe it's more of a utopian vision. But for me, I'd like to see more governments come together and kind of agree on what's possible, what's not possible, what should be done, what should not be done. Because, I mean, let's be honest, Landsat is potentially kind of transitioning to a different model, if you've kept up with the news. So we are kind of depending on Sentinels and the Copernicus program for doing or seeing everything that's going on in the world. Sentinel is open.
What different model are they potentially transitioning to?
Well, it's, going through kind of, they've submitted the proposal again for the second time or the third time for the Landsat program to kind of be transitioned into a commercial model. So instead of launching the Landsat satellites, buy from commercial providers and give away part of that data maybe as an alternative to Landsat data. Is it going to be the same quality? Is it going to be the same sensor? Is it going to be the same everything? Most likely no. But then, I think that transition is happening. So I don't know if that's going to happen for sure, because last year, the US Congress said no to the proposal and actually funded the program as it was intended. But then this year, they have come out and submitted again. So how long that's going to keep going? But then, thank God for Copernicus, right? Because that still exists. The next generation of Copernicus still is going to go on. They're investing in there's the next generation that's happening. And they're also planning for the next to next generation in the 2030s. So I'm glad that exists. But then because we have so many countries now deploying their own capacity of their own satellites, we need to be able to kind of come together and agree on kind of sharing a lot of that data, obviously safely, obviously with the right licensing and with the right model. But we're going to have so much capacity. So it would be kind of unfair, you can argue, to just depend on Copernicus when you have so many countries launching your own constellation, to kind of pull together kind of a common pool of data, especially if you want to have a bit more higher resolution data that's available, etc. Yeah.
I wonder if models and embeddings are going to be part of the answer to this problem. So yeah, you can have access to the data; it's in the model, as opposed to here are the pixels.
Yeah, 100%. I can definitely see that happening, where you don't have to worry about kind of, let's say, giving out the raw imagery itself. You can, give the embedding out and let that kind of do the work. Definitely possible. But yeah, I think we need to also have discussions on what the embeddings are. Are they open or closed? You can't really compromise on the science. Sentinel and Landsat are kind of so widely used because they are reliable, trustable, open. People know what's going on. So reliability is a big thing. So embeddings could be an answer. But yeah, if it's from a closed model, I'm not really sure, especially if you're going to trust science decisions based on a closed model or a disaster management decision based on a closed model. That's an interesting discussion to have as well. It's an exciting time. I think I talked about so much, I'm saying defense is the biggest market. There are so many countries investing. They're probably not going to open up more because of geopolitics, but really, I think it's an interesting time to be in the industry because we kind of are at a time where we have so much capacity coming in, coupled with all the geopolitical challenges, but also the technologies like embeddings, foundation models coming in. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how the next decade goes and piecing together everything that we have, because there is calls for increased transparency, increased kind of reporting, if you want to talk about it from a corporate perspective, but also from necessity point of view. There's a lot of this data becoming more and more necessary because of environmentally and climate-wise how the world is going. So the fact that we have so much data is great. And I'd like to probably believe this is more of a belief. That's more of maybe, again, a naive belief that this is kind of how we're going to be and it's all going to be closed. Every country is going to launch their own thing. We're not going to have much open. I feel like that's probably going to be a blip, maybe 3 years, maybe 5 years. And then potentially we'll start pulling those resources together because, yeah, if you want to be able to solve a lot of your problems, you're not going to be magically monitoring your wildfire event, which are increasing depending on which country you're in, or drought or floods, whatever part of the world you're in. If you want to be able to monitor that and give your citizens and give your businesses what they require, you need like proper real-time monitoring, real-time modeling. You can't do that as one country. It's the same argument as, you can't go to Mars as one country. We need to have pool of countries come together. So I kind of feel like it's also the same thing for monitoring this world and this planet. So you need to be able to kind of pull together what we have. And I think the more we acknowledge it and kind of move in that direction. And the good thing is it was done. It was done in the 80s. Today we are monitoring weather around the world with weather satellites because a lot of the countries came together 40, 50 years ago and decided, I'm going to take up the afternoon monitoring. You take up the morning monitoring. We take up the evening monitoring. So we did that before for weather, of course. And I know Earth observation is dual use. It has this defense kind of parallel all the time. But the fact that we did that 40 years ago kind of makes me hopeful that we can kind of come together. Maybe not every country in the world, but maybe some countries in the world to pull together, which is Copernicus is a good example of that, pulling together. And if you bring in a lot more countries who are investing, I can kind of think of a world where, we have shared capacity we are sharing between different countries. And that data is becoming open and available for a lot of innovation to happen. And that's the story of Sentinel and Copernicus. So I want to see that kind of be expanded, especially for a bit more high resolution missions as well, because you can only do so much with 10 meter and you're going to reach the limit of 10 or 5 meter. You kind of need to go to a 1 meter data set for unlocking a bit more and to be able to monitor a bit more meaningfully. Like you can't really go and solve a lot of use cases with 10 meter. It does have its limits. So yeah, hopefully that can happen, but maybe that's my naive utopian vision of the future.
Well, I would like to be just as naive as you. It would be awesome if that happened. And personally, I think it will. I think it would be a little bit naive to think if every country in the world will be part of it. Like you mentioned 60 before. It's hard to imagine all 60 will get together and say, yep, this is the way.
Yeah, 27 is happening, European Union 27. So
exactly. Yeah.
Bring in the Canadian friends, Australian friends, Kiwi friends, a few others, from the world, the Middle East. Yeah, I think it's possible. I think there are some weather worked out primarily because weather over the Atlantic affects Asia or vice versa, so it is inherently global. So you need to agree on. With Earth observation, you can argue, you know what, I'm only going to monitor my borders and it's enough. But then, if you really want to make your model sustainable, do you really want satellites all the time from your country in space? Then you need to figure out a model because you can't keep investing 100 million, 200 million all the time. But I mean, having said all that, we do have 5 GNSS systems in the world, 5 or 6, I don't know. But, Japan has it, Russia has it, China has it, India has it, US has it, Europe has it. Was all the 6 necessary? No, but then we do have 5 or 6. So maybe we will have 60 or 70 Earth observation constellations, and governments will keep funding them because they believe it's necessary, even though it's not logical. Maybe it's better to pull together, but maybe sovereignty trumps logic if countries think like that. Maybe sovereignty will trump any logic, any ROI analysis. We will keep investing because that's the state of the world. Then that's where we will be in the future. It's not ideal, but you probably have to accept that's where we are in the world.
But again, when we talk about this as critical infrastructure, the idea of building in redundancy, that sounds like a really, really good idea.
How redundant is there something as too much redundancy? Is there something as?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking of it as, you have 100 million. Is there another problem that you can invest in? Maybe you can invest in kind of a better model for crop monitoring. You can invest in a better system for storing all that data, processing all that data. Because, let's be honest, I think European Union is footing the bill for the world. Landsat program footed the bill for the world, continues to foot the bill for the world. It does give them soft power, but then politically speaking, there'll come a time where every country asks the same question. How long can we foot the bill for the world and invest in our storage, invest in the launch of Sentinel, invest in the storage of Sentinel, invest in the dissemination of all the Sentinel data? So if I were to think about it logically, any logical kind of politician will come and ask, why do we need to do that? We've seen instances of that in the past. Why do we need to foot the bill? So it's not wrong to ask that question of why it won't happen in the future. So redundancy is good, but then I think at some point it will start being questioned. And yeah, for me, it's a better model to pull together the resources, take what each country or part of the world offers, and kind of build it into a global system of systems. If you can kind of think about that architecture, you cannot have a system architecture if you have 60 countries launching their own thing, but their data won't speak to each other. Like, what's the point of having 60 countries have? If their data is not interoperable, if their data is not really meaningfully observing the same thing, then you really have like a fragmented system or system of systems that are very fragmented. And if somebody wants to piece together, it's going to be impossible to do it because they don't talk to each other. The data is not interoperable. And so I think that's why I think bringing the people together, I guess the governments together, some governments together, would be great. But clearly, we're not in that timeline. I'm going to repeat that because it would be absurd to suggest that in 2026 when everybody is investing or focused on investing in their own thing. But I'm thinking like 3 to 5 years from now.
Let's be very, very clear. I don't think that you're wrong, but I completely understand the sovereignty argument. I completely understand that, and the idea of redundancy. We've seen so many examples now of people just turning things off. Pieces of software that are used all over the world that are just turned off one day. And that is terrifying. I get the need for investment. We talked about a lot of things. What are you most excited about for the next 10 years?
Well, a lot of what we talked about, whether a lot of what I just discussed happens or not. What I'm excited about is, or probably not excited about, is if the Earth observation industry limits itself being a government operator. So if the future of Earth observation is just being a government like an operator, yeah, nothing wrong with that because you're just serving the needs of your countries and regions that require these technologies. I'd be a bit disappointed about the industry if that's the future. Kind of just focusing on government contracts and doing, as you mentioned, shoehorning everything else in the side. I would be a bit disappointed if that happens. But I guess what I'm excited about is like newer kind of missions that are coming up, whether it's from NASA, ESA, JAXA, ISRO, China as well. They're all investing a lot into newer systems that can do and monitor and observe things that weren't observable before. Or, NISAR is an exciting mission that was launched recently by NASA. You have P-band SAR, meaning you can kind of look at, millimeter movements. So, monitoring all the bridges and railway tracks around the world, monitoring infrastructure, monitoring agricultural fields, etc., using different bands, different sensors. The new Copernicus missions are super exciting. Hyperspectral data was never free before, and now we're going to have a new hyperspectral mission from Copernicus called CHIME that's going to provide hyperspectral data for free, and it's going to unlock a new market. Hyperspectral data has always been kind of slow because it's like, where are the processing libraries? Where's the free data? But now we're going to have the free data. So I think a lot of those missions are exciting. And I think from a private sector point of view, I think also companies are kind of, I guess, testing out new models because, you can just be a data supplier and just be a satellite supplier if you want, just supplying satellites, supplying data. And now companies are now kind of diversifying and trying different models. Maybe we should give a platform. Maybe we should partner with an Anthropic. Maybe we should partner with a Google to kind of put our data into their models that they're developing. So I think from a business point of view, obviously I'm working in strategy and I run a commercial advisory firm. So I think that kind of interests me a lot. And then lastly, I think the point that you mentioned before on adoption in the world of AI is very, very exciting for me because Earth observation for me is a technology where you cannot imagine all the use cases of it for the end user. So the hive mind, the crowd mind, if you want, of the people is much, much better. It's going to unlock a lot more use cases especially if, you can go and kind of spend a weekend and make your own satellite data monitoring application using satellite imagery without knowing remote sensing today. Maybe you know a little bit of the foundation, but you can go and build your farm monitoring application over a weekend because the data is there, the model is there, you can go and do it. So for me, I think that's another exciting thing of what end users in the industry, whether it's in energy or insurance or agriculture, they're going to be able to start playing around. Are they going to create like the most incredible products tomorrow? No, but then they're going to be able to try out. And I feel like that's kind of what happened in 2008 when Android opened up its its app store and put out a framework for people to start developing apps. We had like a lot of amazing apps come in. Without observation, we never quite got there because using it was very hard. Processing it was very hard. You wouldn't really be able to process it on the cloud at all. And now that's all becoming possible. So you can actually go and spin up a new notebook, Jupyter notebook, write your code, publish, push it, get your application live and report and start working. So, I mean, I'm excited to see if you're going to buy a house somewhere, maybe in the future, you'll be able to create your own quick little application to kind of figure out what's the wildfire risk, what's the flood risk, what's all the risks of your house from data that's already available and the models that are already available. I think a person can be able to do that in the future if some things continue, like open data continues, high resolution data is available. Then you should be able to go and create this application. Should I buy the house here or not? Right? I think those are all kind of things that were like possible, like a little bit. You can do that for a neighborhood. You can't really do that for a specific area property, like with a higher resolution, spatial resolution. Maybe that's going to become possible. For me, that's exciting, right? You can make your personal decisions better. Can I open a new shop in this neighborhood? Are the residents going to go away because there's a wildfire like 1 kilometer from this area? So for me to open a shop is a bad idea, right? So things like that, you can get an answer based on like Google Trends, but now you can actually use a lot more actual environmental intelligence, like trends over the years, to kind of figure that out. So for me, I think that's exciting from a user perspective, what they'll be able to unlock application wise that I'm sure I've never thought about, and a lot of satellite companies have never thought about. For me, that's exciting. That's what we saw with Sentinel with 10 meter and Landsat with 30. So if we extend that to 1 meter or 5 meters, whatever data is going to become available for free in the future, for me, that's exciting because you're going to unlock a lot more applications than we ever imagined.
Yeah. I feel like I'm just saying I totally agree with you, but I do totally agree with you here. It's a really interesting time, I think. So we talked about data is becoming more and more available, and we have these cloud native data formats. We have an increased understanding of how to process these things. The libraries are getting better. And then for me, the icing on the cake is AI, Claude Code, Codex, where you can just build an application. Now, some people out there listening to this are going to hate me for saying that, but it's true. And people will. And I think that is going to be fascinating what they come up with.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's why I think the App Store is a great example. Like you found a new app and you download it and you discover it's actually shit and it's full of bugs. And so a lot of the applications that people are going to develop using these kind of shoehorn baked in model technologies, it's going to be like that. But that's kind of how we probably grow as an industry because we never really got the chance. I think Sentinel gave us that opportunity 10 years ago and Landsat from 2008. But really, the industry has been kind of open, really, for 18 years now after Landsat. But a lot of that 18 was like with legacy systems where you can't really code on the cloud. You can't process on the cloud. You can't really find the models that you need. You can't find the knowledge that you need to have. People don't need to know what the definition of NDVI or the formula for NDVI is anymore because you can go get a code, copy paste, run it over an area. You will be able to get your healthiness of crop without even understanding what is a band, what is multispectral, what is NDVI. You can get your results. So for me, I think that's kind of convergence is super exciting. Yeah, I think, is it going to lead to like revenues and growth of the industry? Maybe in the long term, but I think that can come later. For me now, what I'm excited about is like my friend who's never heard of satellite data, does not know anything about remote sensing, finally can now kind of start trying out. Is he going to create a Uber tomorrow, Uber-like company tomorrow, like create like $1 billion application? Maybe not, but we're going to be able to start trying it now. So that's for me better than when I came into the industry in 2016, 17. So in 10 years, I think we've kind of gotten to that point. Even with all the challenges that we spoke about of like defense, domination, etc., still great to be in a position where we are. And I can see that in action because when I speak with end users from different industries or the folks who contact me who are exploring the use of satellite data, it's exciting. A real estate company kind of looking at new use cases, energy companies, insurance companies looking at new use cases. For me, that's exciting that they're starting to see what value it can add. And for me, I think the value of satellite data is like, of course, there is the societal part of it, but then the economic part of it for me is also interesting. If it can help companies save money because they're able to monitor things better, or they're able to create new products that would not have existed. You cannot launch an insurance product in the global south because there are no weather stations. There is no record of anything. So if you want to create a flood insurance product in that country, not possible. But now it's possible. So for me, that's exciting that we are able to kind of do that today.
Yeah, I'm excited too. And I think you said, will he create the next Uber? Will she create the next Uber? Probably not. But a lot of people are going to throw a lot of stuff at the wall, and some of it's going to stick, and it's going to be super interesting and inspirational, I think. Like looking at it, go, oh, I never would have thought of that. I never would have done that thing here.
100%.
Yeah. So, Aravind, thank you very much for coming along. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed the conversation.
This was a great chat.
And I hope we can get you back on at some stage.
Yeah, I think maybe when the industry changes and kind of radically changes in the next 5 years. Well, if it's the same in 5 years, then hey, what's the point in doing the same in 5 years? Maybe it's not 60 countries, it's 90 countries. Maybe it's some new technologies have come up and, SpaceX has launched, 10,000 or 100,000 more satellites. So there's probably not going to be enough talking points if the industry hasn't changed much in 5 years. I'd be very disappointed if we speak again and things haven't changed radically. So I hope for manifesting a radical change in the industry then.
Yep. Let's hope for radical change.
Yeah.
Thanks again. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Daniel. It's my pleasure.